Welcome. Like I mentioned last video, this video is gonna be all about time, and that's because we're talking about Everhood, one of my all-time favorite games, a game that constantly gets unfairly, in my opinion, compared to Undertale, and a game that absolutely bangs. It has a genuinely good soundtrack, nicely written characters, it has a super cool world, cool art style, a amount of sort of weird real life experience involved in it, and it all feels like a psychedelic trip. If you haven't heard about Everhood before, stop watching this video right now. Go and buy it on Steam. It usually is fairly cheap in the €10 range, and honestly, it is pretty good. I recommend going and giving it a go before you watch this video. And if you don't want to do that and you don't care about spoilers and whatnot, then go ahead and watch it. But I'm just saying that I think it's worth giving a play by itself before you watch somebody else talk about it. So what is Everhood? Everhood is incredibly hard to put in under one definition. Some people would call it an Undertale-like. I wouldn't do that. I think Everhood fits really well in under the category of super difficult game, not Souls-like, just an incredibly difficult experience that requires fast reaction time, pseudo dancing, pseudo bullet hell, but more importantly, super well written. It is in every word an RPG, with a world that feels lived in even before and after you arrive. It is a world that genuinely made me curious on my now multiple playthroughs, with secrets to unlock, with bangers and everything else in between. It is a game that genuinely makes me feel like I'm on a acid trip, and I couldn't be happier for it. The game itself is incredibly fantastic, so let's talk a little bit about gameplay. So, the gameplay of Everhood, like I've said, is incredibly good. Very much like a game like Undertale, which I will be comparing it to, despite the fact that I don't think it's a copy. You walk around a lot in what feels like a cave, but probably isn't supposed to be. But you walk around a lot. You talk to different NPCs, and mostly every NPC at some point holds a fight for you. There's no in-between battles. There's no random battles like there would be in a game like Pokemon. In Everhood, you only have the boss fights, and the combat is what sells me on this game completely. It's sort of like Beat Saber, actually, in the sense that you have some blocks or notes that you have to avoid that goes intact with the boss's song or the theme of him or her, and it genuinely bangs because all of the boss themes are super good, and I really mean super good. They are usually super weird and super interesting. And here's the kicker when it comes to Everhood. One thing that I noticed on my second playthrough is that they tend to have a quirk to them, all of the boss fights. Which is to say that the game generally does something different every boss fight almost. There's one of them, and I think my favorite example of it is one where up until that point there's been no real fighting back. And here you enter this cave house-ish area, and the guy has a Shmiga gaming console, which is a play on the Sega one. It even has its own little like starting up sound screen, just like the Sega. It has the Shmiga. It's so cool. I love it. And on it, you don't have a natural game because here's the thing that unlocks another boss fight. But where normally you'd be dodging these, notes, here you are playing tennis. One ball goes over and you're dead. However, if it doesn't, you can beat the shit out of your opponent with that tennis ball, just slamming it back, and it's so good. It's just a lot of fun, really. And another example of a quirk that a boss has is later in the game you'll meet a wizard, and that wizard, whenever they hit you with one of the notes, it will turn back the song. And that sort of makes it go for a longer period of time. For me, on my very first attempt on it, I remember it vividly back in the day when I was playing it for the first time. that specific boss fight had me going for like 10 minutes despite it being a 3.5 minute long song. And that's simply because I kept being hit. Because here's the thing. Everhood requires insanely precise controls. Because they are fluid, you just have to be really fast and be able to always, be there on the move and on the flow with them. And it can sometimes be hard, but in general, I don't think it's impossible. There are some of the secret fights in the game that are generally some of the hardest things I've ever fought in any game. And in my opinion, they are a little bit overtuned. I'm looking at you, Catguard, and if you've played it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Catguard is hard. There's a boss fight called Wrath of the Frog, and it is so difficult. It is quite literally some of the hardest things I've ever done. There are achievements for no-hitting them, and it should be mentioned that the Catguard fight has a 0.5% completion rate. And if you don't really know what that means, it just means that not a lot of people have completed it where you haven't been hit. And in my opinion, if you really want to see some high tier gaming, then go to YouTube and find somebody doing a no-hit run of Everhood. It is insane to watch, just genuinely insane and super cool. You know what, I'll link one down in the description. And that being said, that's really what there is to talk about when it comes to gameplay. I think we should move along and just talk a little bit about the story. The story of Everhood is shattered in the sense that you have to sort of piece some of the parts together yourself. I am gonna talk about the story of the world here, not the events of the game, if that makes sense, because they are two very different things. In the world of Everhood, people found a way in another world to live forever. However, with living forever also comes the fact that you get bored. What's the point when you can't die, really? And that's really the question you have to answer yourself throughout the game. What's the point of infinite life when you sort of just get incredibly bored? And that's really what the game is all about. That is sort of the entire, I would call it the theme of the game. And the way it is made to discover it is through text notes and whatnot, talking with different NPCs and sort of piecing it together yourself. And I think it makes for a pretty fun experience overall. That being said, the events of the game are slightly different to that, and they follow the same theme of death and reincarnation and so on. But I'm not going to talk about them in depth, because they generally do one of the biggest twists and most mind-blowing things I have experienced, I think, in a game. And I think it's very important that you get to experience that for yourself when you're playing it. Because if I were here, just explaining it to you, it would lessen the experience. It's like Joseph Anderson said in his review of Elden Ring. If I showed you gameplay of some of the things, or like just generally the end of Everhood, it would ruin the experience completely. And I think to that end, I'm not going to talk much more about the story, because I really think it is such a huge thing in Everhood and a big reason why you want to continue playing the game. Because Everhood has one of the genuinely best written stories out there. It's such a hidden gem and a masterpiece. And in my opinion, it's something that's worth playing, right? And I think most people who have, played it agree with me on that. That being said, we are going to talk about the writing next. So let's get straight over to that. When it comes to the writing of Everhood, I sort of see the Undertale comparisons. As while they don't try to pull the super quirky Undertale things, they do try to sort of pull some of it. It's not to the same degree as something like Sans from Undertale's, but the writing is definitely around the same level as Undertale's, which is a genuinely good thing. It's such a nice thing to see deep characters being made here, and characters that I genuinely have found myself loving. And that's partially because all of the characters have their own personality. They are very clearly motivated by something within the game, and they're very clearly interested in, the goals that the main character has. And they just manage to be genuinely nice, right? And I think that's so important in games, that you don't dislike the characters that you are around, and in Everhood you definitely don't. And I think it's generally pretty good for that. The writing overall is just really good, and the thing is, I want to go more in depth with it, but I can't because I'll start giving you spoilers. So let's just go to the next thing and talk about art style and music. Now, talking about the art style, I think this is where the comparisons to Undertale come from, because they can look a little alike, with the exception that Everhood uses a lot more colors to especially express the psychedelic breakdown segments. But it does sort of look like Undertale in places because of the very mucho clear inspiration in the pixel art and sprites for it. That being said, I think especially in the boss fights, what they do with the psychedelic breakdown stuff in the middle of a boss fight, right? You're focusing, you're looking at the arena, and then all of a sudden these waves and psychedelic effects, like the entire screen starts to change in front of you in the middle of the boss fight, while you have to like still dodge and like listen to the music. It's so well done. And meanwhile you're doing that, the music changes, right? And it makes it into this insanely tense and interesting experience where on one hand you're trying to avoid getting hit, on another your eyes are hurting, on a third it feels like you're in the middle of a psychedelic trip. And that's really, I'd say, Everhood's biggest, most prominent feature, and well, good thing that they do, is giving you this experience that feels like it literally is a psychedelic breakdown. And it all leads up to a quote big truth moment, and I think it's pretty well earned. I think it's really well done, and yeah, I think it's really good. And here's the thing, right? The art style, while yes, it is inspired by Undertale, at least I'd assume so, because it looks a lot alike. And while it's doing that, it still manages to be cute and be its own thing. And that's, at the end of the day, the most important thing. The game is its own thing. It's not Undertale, it's not even close to it. And I think that's pretty telling, because especially of the combat, but also because of the theming in the game about literal life and death and reincarnation. And that's not to say that Undertale doesn't have any of that. It's just to say that I think the way it's done in Everhood is super interesting and has stuck with me since I've played it the first time like 2 years ago. And I think that's really all there is to say about it, right? And when it comes to music, like I said in the previous video as well, the music fits. The music, when you are starting to get into the psychedelic elements, also starts to break down, and they like put distorted effects over it and so on. And in general, they're just really well done with all of the boss tracks. So that being said, I can again sit here and like pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but instead of doing that, I think I'll just give you a snippet of music from the game. So let me know what you think about it when you're done listening to it in the comments. There'll be the next 30 seconds will just be a boss theme from somewhere early in the game. That being said and shown, let me know what you think about that exact music down in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, I really want to know. And lastly, thank you for watching. I am genuinely happy that you made it this far, and thank you for spending this extra time with me. I genuinely appreciate it, and you know, it's awesome that you wanted to do that. So do the YouTube stuff if you feel inclined. If you don't worry about it. If you're interested in Everhood, I highly recommend going and giving it a try. And more importantly, if you're interested in its music, well, not more importantly, but if you are, I will link a link to the OST in the description here. So go and check it out if you want to. Otherwise, have a wonderful either day or night, depending on when you're watching it. and I think I'll go to bed. It's gonna be 2 or 10 a.m. and I am pretty fucking tired. So I will see you all in the next one.